June 1870. United States Patent Office, Washington, D.C. Margaret Knight stands in front of a patent examiner, her hands shaking. She's 32 years old, a factory worker. She spent 2 years perfecting a machine that manufactures flat-bottomed paper bags. She filed for a patent months ago. The process should be simple, routine, but there's a problem. Another patent application has been filed for the exact same machine by a man named Charles Annan. The patent examiner looks at Margaret, then at the paperwork. Mr. Annan claims he invented this machine, the examiner says. He filed his application after yours, but he says the idea is his, that you couldn't possibly have invented something this complex. Margaret's jaw tightens. I did invent it. I built it. I have the prototypes. I have witnesses. The examiner looks uncomfortable. Miss Knight, Mr. Annan says that a woman lacks the mechanical knowledge necessary for such an invention. Then let's go to court, Margaret says. This is extraordinary. A woman challenging a man in patent court. In 1870, women couldn't vote, couldn't serve on juries, were considered legally inferior. And Margaret Knight, a factory worker with no formal education, was about to sue a man who claimed she was too stupid to invent her own machine. The trial lasted months. Charles Annan had lawyers, money, confidence. Margaret had notebooks, sketches, prototypes, and the truth. She brought witnesses who testified they'd seen her building the machine. She showed her detailed drawings, dated years before Annan filed his claim. She testified herself, calmly, precisely. She explained every gear, every mechanism, every innovation. The courtroom was packed. Journalists came to watch the spectacle. A woman inventor defending herself. Some came to mock her. Some came hoping she'd win. On July 11, 1871, the court ruled in Margaret's favor. The judge declared that Charles Annan had derived his knowledge of the invention from seeing Miss Knight's machine. In other words, he stole it. Margaret won. She got her patent. The newspapers called it a victory for women, a triumph of justice, and it was. But here's what happened next. Margaret spent the rest of her life inventing. She held 87 patents. 87. She invented machines for cutting shoes, rotary engines, window frames, devices that are still used today. And she died in 1914, age 76, with $275 in her bank account. $275. Meanwhile, the companies that manufactured her paper bag machine made millions. The paper bag industry today is worth $4.5 billion annually. Margaret Knight received almost nothing. She won the legal battle. She proved she was a genius. And the world still robbed her. But to understand how this happened, we need to go back to the beginning. To Massachusetts, 1838, to a girl who nearly died in a factory at age 12. Margaret E. Knight was born on February 14, 1838, in York, Maine. Her father, James Knight, died when Margaret was very young. Suddenly her mother was alone with several children and no income. This was before child labor laws, before worker protections, before safety nets. If you were poor and your father died, your childhood ended. Margaret's mother moved the family to Manchester, New Hampshire, where there were jobs, factory jobs. At age 10, Margaret started working in a cotton mill, 10 years old, 12-hour days, dangerous machinery, deafening noise. Children worked alongside adults. Small hands were useful for reaching into machines to clear jams. Small hands that got caught, crushed, mangled. Margaret saw children die, saw them lose fingers, hands, arms. At age 12, she witnessed an accident that changed her life. A steel-tipped shuttle, a sharp, heavy piece of machinery, shot out of a textile loom and impaled a young worker. The boy was standing too close. The shuttle flew like a spear. He died within minutes. Margaret watched it happen. That night she went home and started sketching. She designed a safety mechanism, a device that would stop the loom instantly if a shuttle came loose. She was 12 years old. She had no formal engineering training. She could barely read, but she could see the problem and she could see the solution. She built a prototype out of scrap metal and wood. She brought it to the factory supervisor. He looked at this little girl holding a mechanical device she'd built herself. He didn't believe her. "Did your father make this?" "My father's dead," Margaret said. "I made it." He tested it. It worked. The mill installed Margaret's safety device. Then other mills heard about it. They installed it too. How many lives did it save? Dozens, maybe hundreds. Did Margaret get paid? No. Did she get credit? Not really. She was 12. She was a girl. The device was installed and everyone moved on. But Margaret didn't move on. She'd discovered something. She could invent things. For the next 20 years, Margaret worked in factories, paper mills, machine shops. She made tools, fixed equipment, improved processes. She invented constantly. Small things, a foot warmer, a dress shield, improvements to industrial machinery. But she didn't patent anything. Patents cost money. She had none. She was surviving. Barely. By her late 20s, Margaret was working at the Columbia Paper Bag Company in Springfield, Massachusetts. Paper bags at the time were useless. They were shaped like envelopes. Flat. You couldn't stand them up. Couldn't pack anything heavy. If you bought groceries, shopkeepers wrapped them in paper and tied them with string. Slow, wasteful. Margaret watched the bag-making machines. They folded paper into tubes and glued the sides. Fast. But the product was terrible. She thought, what if the bottom was flat? What if the bag could stand up? Flat-bottomed bags. So obvious. So simple. But making them by machine was incredibly complex. You'd need to fold paper in multiple directions, cut precise angles, glue in sequence. All automatically. Margaret started sketching. She worked at night after her shifts. She built models out of paper and cardboard. She calculated angles, gear ratios, timing sequences. By 1867, she had a complete design. She built a wooden prototype. It worked. She built a metal prototype. It worked better. She tested it. The machine produced perfect flat-bottomed paper bags. Automatically. Dozens per minute. It was revolutionary. In 1868, she traveled to Boston to have an iron prototype built at a machine shop. She spent months there supervising construction, refining the design. And that's when Charles Annan saw it. Annan worked at the machine shop. He watched Margaret, saw her design, saw her prototypes. He understood immediately. This machine was worth a fortune. So he copied it. He made his own drawings, filed his own patent application, and claimed he invented it. Margaret found out when the patent office contacted her. There was a conflict. 2 applications for the same invention. She was furious. She knew exactly what happened. But proving it would be nearly impossible. Annan had money, had credibility, had lawyers. Margaret was a woman, a factory worker. No education, no resources. Everyone expected her to give up. She didn't. She hired a lawyer. She gathered evidence. She prepared for war. The case went to trial. Patent interference case. Knight v. Annan. Annan's argument was simple. A woman couldn't possibly have invented this. The machine is too mechanically complex. I invented it. She must have seen my work and copied it. He was betting on sexism, on the assumption that judges and patent examiners would never believe a woman could out-engineer a man. Margaret's argument was evidence. She brought her notebooks, dated entries going back years, sketches, calculations, iterations of the design. She brought witnesses. Men from the machine shop who testified they'd seen her building the prototypes, seen her directing the work. She brought the wooden prototype, the one she'd built before Annan ever saw the design, and then she testified. She stood in court and explained in precise technical detail how every part of the machine worked. She described the cam mechanisms, the folding sequences, the glue application timing. She answered every question, never hesitated, never stumbled. The judges were stunned. This woman knew more about mechanical engineering than most trained engineers. Annan's lawyers tried to trip her up. They asked complex technical questions, hoping she'd falter. She answered every one, perfectly. On July 11, 1871, the court ruled. Margaret Knight was the true inventor. Charles Annan had stolen her design, Patent number 116842 was granted to Margaret E. Knight. She won. The newspapers celebrated. Woman inventor defeats male imposter. Lady Edison triumphs in court. It was a huge story. A woman had defended her invention against a man and won. Justice had prevailed. Except justice doesn't pay the bills. Margaret had won the patent. But she'd spent nearly all her money on legal fees. And now she had to manufacture the machines. She couldn't do it alone. She didn't have a factory, didn't have capital. So she did what she had to. She partnered with a businessman to form the Eastern Paper Bag Company. She contributed the patent. He contributed the money. They manufactured the machines, sold them to paper bag companies across America. The machines were a massive success. Every bag manufacturer wanted one. Within 5 years, flat-bottomed paper bags were everywhere. Grocery stores, shops, markets. The industry exploded. Margaret received royalties, but her partner received more, much more. She made enough to survive, to keep inventing, but not to become wealthy. Meanwhile, the paper bag industry made millions, and Margaret went back to work. Over the next 40 years, Margaret Knight invented constantly. She held 87 patents. 87. She invented machines for shoe manufacturing, rotary engines, numbering machines, window frames and sashes. She invented a clasp for robes, a spit for roasting meat, a dress and skirt shield. She invented industrial machinery that's still in use today. In 1902, she was invited to the World's Fair as one of the most prolific female inventors in history. Newspapers called her the female Edison. She was respected, admired, recognized, but she was never wealthy. Every patent cost money to file, money to maintain, money to defend. Every invention required prototypes, materials, machine shop time. Margaret spent everything she earned on the next invention. She lived simply, modestly. She never married, never had children. Her life was inventing. And on October 12, 1914, Margaret Knight died in Framingham, Massachusetts. She was 76 years old. Her estate was valued at $275.06. $275. The woman who held 87 patents, who revolutionized the paper bag industry, who invented machines still used today, died nearly broke. Her obituary in the New York Times was respectful. It called her a woman Edison and listed some of her inventions. But it was brief, a few paragraphs. Meanwhile, Thomas Edison, who had teams of engineers working for him, who took credit for inventions his employees created, was treated like a god. Margaret did the work herself and died with nothing. Let's talk about what Margaret Knight actually invented. The flat-bottomed paper bag is one of the most important inventions in commercial history. Before Margaret's machine, there was no practical way to carry goods. Everything was wrapped in paper and string, or carried in expensive reusable containers. Margaret's bag was cheap, disposable, strong. It could stand up, could carry weight. It made modern retail possible. Grocery stores, department stores, take-out food. All of it relies on the flat-bottomed bag. Today, the global paper bag market is worth $4.5 billion annually. The US alone produces over 10 billion paper bags per year. Every single one is based on Margaret Knight's design. She received a tiny fraction of the profits during her lifetime. Her estate received nothing after her death. The companies that manufactured her machines made millions. The retailers who used the bags made billions. Margaret got $275. But it's not just the paper bags. Her other inventions were equally important. She invented a rotary engine that was more efficient than existing designs. Car companies studied it. She invented shoe-cutting machines that revolutionized footwear manufacturing. She invented window frame machinery that's still used in construction. She invented numbering machines used in printing. 87 patents, 87 innovations, and she died poor. Because the system wasn't designed to reward inventors, it was designed to reward capital. Margaret had genius, she didn't have capital, so she invented, and others profited. Here's what makes Margaret's story different from the others. She fought back, and she won. Garrett Morgan sold his patent because he had no choice. Lewis Latimer worked for Edison and received a salary. Nikola Tesla tore up his contract to save a friend. Mary Anderson couldn't sell her patent at all, but Margaret Knight sued in 1870 as a woman against a man, and she won. That victory mattered. It set a precedent. It proved that women could defend their intellectual property, but it didn't make her rich, and that's the point. Even when the system works, even when justice prevails, it's not enough. Because winning the right to your invention doesn't mean you can profit from it. You still need capital, manufacturing, distribution, marketing, all things Margaret didn't have. So she licensed her inventions, partnered with businessmen, took what she could get, and she kept inventing. Because that's what she loved. But love doesn't pay rent. After Margaret's death, she was mostly forgotten. A few engineering journals mentioned her, a few women's history books. But she wasn't in textbooks, wasn't taught in schools. In 2006, 92 years after her death, she was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. In 2013, she was featured in a book about women inventors. In 2020, her story started appearing in articles and social media. Did you know a woman invented the paper bag? It became a trivia fact, a fun bit of history. But here's what those articles don't say. Margaret Knight didn't just invent the paper bag. She invented 87 things. She didn't just fight for her patent. She won. She didn't just succeed once. She spent 50 years inventing. And she died poor anyway. Because the system is designed to extract genius and give back pennies. Margaret proved she was brilliant, proved she could out-invent and out-engineer men, and it didn't matter. She still ended up with 275. This is still happening. In 2019, a study found that women inventors earn 30% less from their patents than men, even controlling for field and patent quality. In 2021, female-founded startups received just 2% of venture capital funding. In 2023, women hold only 13% of patents in the United States, not because women aren't inventing, but because the system still doesn't support them. Margaret Knight fought harder than almost any inventor in this series. She won in court. She earned respect. She was called the female Edison, and she still died with nothing. If fighting isn't enough, what is? The answer is systemic change, access to capital, equal treatment, fair compensation, things that didn't exist in Margaret's time, things that still barely exist today. Every paper bag you've ever used exists because of Margaret Knight. Every grocery bag, every takeout bag, every lunch bag, the bag your coffee comes in, the bag the pharmacy gives you, the bag you pack your lunch in. All of them. Margaret Knight. And most people have never heard her name. Think about that. An invention you use constantly. An invention that changed commerce. An invention so fundamental you don't even notice it. Created by a woman who died with $275. That's not just forgotten history, that's erasure. Deliberate, systematic erasure. Because if we remembered Margaret Knight, we'd have to ask uncomfortable questions like, why did she die poor? Why did the companies that used her machine make millions while she made nothing? Why is Thomas Edison a household name with 1,093 patents, while Margaret Knight is unknown with 87? Why do we celebrate male inventors who had labs and teams, while we forget female inventors who worked alone with no resources? The answer is the same as always. The system wasn't designed for her. It was designed to extract her genius and give her nothing in return. And it worked. Margaret Knight invented the paper bag at age 30. She fought a man in court and won at age 33. She spent the next 40 years inventing 87 patents, machines that changed industries. She was called the female Edison, celebrated at the World's Fair, respected by engineers, and she died at 76 with $275 to her name, while the paper bag industry made millions, while the companies using her machines made fortunes, while Thomas Edison, who employed teams of people to invent for him, became a legend. Margaret did the work herself, and got nothing. Every time you use a paper bag, remember her name, not because it's inspiring, but because it's infuriating, because she deserved better, because genius should be rewarded, not exploited, because winning in court should mean something, Because 87 patents should make you wealthy, not leave you with $275. Remember Margaret Knight, the woman who invented the paper bag, who fought a man in court and won, who spent 50 years inventing and died poor anyway. Remember her name, because the system that failed her is still failing women today, and the only way it changes is if we refuse to forget. Margaret E. Knight, 87 patents, 275s, remember her.